So, we've got ourselves a gun, we've got a new thing that we have to kill, we can set our sword on fucking fire, and we're going to a place that's fertile with death. I miss anything?
Nah, that sounds about right. There's giant bats that spit things at us now. That's something.
That's new, I think. That's like innovation.
So this is the dry road. There is very little of note here. It's basically it's really just like, it's literally a pit stop. Like, there's a Volgrim location, and that's about it.
I mean, I guess you could say it's a dry road. Like, that wasn't even a joke. But yeah, I know what you mean. So, like, it's just on the way to a place. Are there even stuff here to get?
Yeah, there's like one thing. I think it's a Wrath Shard? And I guess there's angels. That's something.
It's not nothing. They have cool swords.
Yeah, I want to say there's a Wrath Shard here, and that's about it.
Well, I guess if this whole location is filler, then this would probably be a pretty good time to bring up whatever it exactly was that you were about to say about the game being good but reminding you a lot about better games before we got mercilessly cut off by the video length. What was that?
Okay, yeah, so I guess what I have to say about that is that like, you can absolutely, I think the degree to which a game is allowed to remind you of better games is heavily, heavily dependent on the quality of the game itself. Because, like, this game is, I think, you know, we can at least, by and large, is maybe not amazing, but it's at least, I would say, like a solid 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I would characterize this video game as absolutely not bad.
Like, the things that it cribs relatively competently, and, you know, it might remind you of something else that's done better, but it's not like one of those things where it's like, yeah, and not only does it's like, you could be playing Zelda, but instead you're playing this. Whereas it gives off more of a, this is a very Zelda-like experience.
Yeah, like, it has the bearing of something that actually understands in any depth why it's worth cribbing from the things that it cribs from. Also, what was this?
What indeed?
Something curious. I guess we'll have to come back to it later with power-ups.
But, like, if you compare that to a game that does something like this but very poorly, like, pick any one of, like, the billion bad Dark Souls clones, right? That is a game that heavily reminds you of something else, but because it does the actual thing so poorly, it leaves you with that, oh, why am I not just playing this?
Strikes me as being very dangerous to try cribbing from Dark Souls.
Yeah, but, you know, they keep trying.
Honestly, I think it's dangerous enough just being Dark Souls. I have feelings about Dark Souls. This is before we even get into the difficulty discourse. Which, yikes. But go on.
So, apropos of nothing, I have absolutely no idea why this particular Volgrim location is here, because, like I said, there is nothing in this area.
Huh.
But hey, we can buy a thing.
It has the word meteor in it. It must be good.
Oh, that's the dash attack for the gauntlet.
Also, it has the word launch in it. It must be really good. Does this game have a solid launcher game? Can you press X, Y, X, 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 Y, so to speak?
The launchers in this game are usually of the hold square variety, and then you go aerial.
Yeah, close enough. I will always hold the Izuna drop combo in my heart. Now that's reminding us of other video games that are great. But yeah, I totally see your point about that. It is good and valid. There's a lot of games that, like, yeah, this game is not bad. It's not bad. In fact, I would hazard I would dare to say that it's actually good. It does a lot of things very right. It understands the things that it's cribbing from sufficiently well enough that it doesn't feel like it's been cheap in cribbing from them. And it manages to put just about enough of its own spin on things that it doesn't even feel outwardly, obviously, like it's cribbing. Which is, you know, good.
Yeah, that's kind of like the ideal state for, like, if you're gonna crib, that's the end result you want.
I mean, when you're talking about video games, when you're talking about like mechanics and systems and like even just concepts, things that you make the player feel, things that you make the player think about, there's really only so much room for interpretation on these ideas, and all of the originality is in execution. I mean, if we're going to go with Dark Souls clones as a method for talking about this, then how about the good Dark Souls clones, by which I basically mean Nioh? Nioh is a game that relentlessly cribs from Dark Souls, but also adds a lot of things on top of it. It understands the appeal at the core of Dark Souls. It tries to make something slightly more involved out of its combat by having things like, you know, its combos and its stances and the frankly astonishing number of interlocking original ideas that come with all of its weapons. But like, it seems at the same time to be blatantly a Dark Souls clone and also astonishingly original. And it, most of the time, does not make me think about Dark Souls. You know, apart from when I die to a boss and then I have to go back to a point and then I get bored running to the boss and something stupid happens on the way to the boss and I lose a bunch of level ups and then I want to murder everything in real life. But, you know, there's only so many of those moments. I don't know how I feel about that kind of thing in this game, though. It's just like, I feel like it's boring in how good it is. Does that make any goddamn sense as a thing to say?
I mean, competent but unexceptional is absolutely, like, a thing that you can knock something for.
Yeah. It's like, you know, the joke about objective game reviews is that, yeah, like, sometimes you get this feeling playing certain games that, like, yeah, this is real competently done and I love it. And sometimes you get this feeling playing games like, yeah, this is real competently done and it's like, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, like, you can absolutely have a game that is well made, but is also super blatantly just going through the motions.
And like, it's, I would really struggle to tell you something that I believe about this game, which is a game that I think is like super competent, well done, and not massively interesting. And, you know, off the top of my head, Titanfall 2, a first-person shooter campaign which absolutely goes through a lot of motions, is really just good about what it is. It's not particularly pretentious about what it is. It's just a nice, good shooter campaign. And yet I will go to the mat saying that Titanfall 2 is one of the best games of this generation. And yet, could I tell you a difference in appraising it on that level between Titanfall 2 and this game? Can I fuck? Maybe I'm not so smart.
So the challenge here should be pretty obvious, even if it wasn't immediately to me when I was playing.
Oh, I think I missed it. I think I was busy getting angry about video games. Oh, I see. Well, you're right, that is pretty obvious. I take it some very judicious use of the, yeah, that thing. It's good when video games remind us that these things exist.
It's always important to check the corners. You never know when you'll find something buried all the way at the bottom.
I've yet to really go and review the way in which this game teaches you about things, but like, I've recently developed a lot of appreciation for how difficult it is to get games to teach players things well. Like, just the fact of how tutorials are presented moment to moment, let alone actually integrated into a larger campaign. Like, the alchemy involved in making these things effective is staggering in its scope, and how many moving parts there are, and how easy it is to get wrong. Maybe you have a better perspective on this than I do, having actually played this game. Opinions?
I think this game... ironically, one of the things that it does well is that because so many of its stuff, of like its mechanics and its, systems are, for lack of a better way of putting it, cribbed from other games, makes it almost... I don't want to say it doesn't need a tutorial, because obviously it does need to teach you how to play the game and how this game's systems work, even if they are very, very similar to, say, Zelda's systems, or, whatever game it happens to be cribbing at the time. But it definitely helps to be able to be like, yeah, it's just Zelda. Like, you already know how Zelda works.
That in and of itself was an angle that I hadn't really appreciated on this whole thing. Is that what if the entire collective unconsciousness of gaming is the tutorial? Although, wow, it would be awkward to get that wrong. Anyway.
So, welcome to the Ashlands. It is kind of a big area.
I mean, okay. Desert. It's appropriate for a place like this to be big. Sand looks like a problem.
Yeah. So you might have noticed those very big worms out there.
I definitely noticed the floating blue thing that we have to hit with our boomerang to stop time.
So, the chronosphere is basically there to make sure that you don't get absolutely fucked, because you do not want to be out on the sand when they're freely moving.
And here I was thinking all we had to do was walk without rhythm. Okay, that's one way to make a point.
So yeah, it's an instant game over if you get caught out on the sand. And you had better believe the game is not going to let you forget that. In a bad way.
See, there's the thing about tutorializing things, is that you have to not let people forget things, but you also have to somehow not be obnoxious about not letting people forget things.
Samaya wasn't kidding about those worms, and the Stygian's supposed to be the mean one.
Thank you, Mark Hamill.
Well, the good news is that it being fated to be a boss battle means we are guaranteed to be able to kill it, whereas I have a feeling that these generic ones are going to be pains in our ass the whole length of the game. Now that's the collective unconsciousness of gaming speaking.
So the Ashlands in general is, yeah, I feel it gives me a lot of Skyward Sword vibes. It's one of those areas where it's like, yeah, there's a dungeon, quote unquote, but like really the whole area here is the dungeon.
Right, you have to go through a big, active, engaging overworld challenge exploration thing that basically feels exactly like doing a dungeon to begin with. Yeah, that is extremely Skyward Sword. It's kind of interesting that you associate that concept so strongly, particularly with Skyward Sword. And I don't think it was the only Zelda game that did that, but it was definitely the one that I most remember doing it.
Yeah, like I said, I'm sure that there are other Zelda games that do that kind of design, but like I said, but that's the one. But like Skyward Sword is the one where like it feels like they really went all in on it.
As now that I think about it, I think they basically did it constantly. That was like there were the three main areas, and you go to it the first time, and you do like it's basically a dungeon. And then you go to the next one, and then you do that, and then you come back to the first one again, and then it's changed in a cool way, and you have to do a new thing. And it's like, people say that there's like, what, 9 dungeons in Skyward Sword?
There were quite a few, yeah.
But really, there were 15.
I mean, I would almost hesitate to just say that I don't know if Skyward Sword actually has any non-dungeon content. Like, other than, like, the sky. But even the sky is just, like... It's, it's still that same kind of thing.
It had problems, but mostly that it was just kind of dull. Like, I don't think... It didn't work as a concept. It wasn't like the sea in Wind Waker, and the sea in Wind Waker came awfully close to not working. Like, everyone remembers arguing about the sailing, and that kind of died down a bit after the remake came out, and you could sail really quickly. But even before that, I was one of the few people who would fight people over sailing, because I thought that actually it was good. It served a purpose. It allowed you to have this downtime, but also it felt that you were constantly actively engaging with something, even when you really weren't. Whereas the sky in Skyward Sword somehow didn't have that feeling. And I don't understand why not.
I mean, a large part of that is that I think the sky in Skyward Sword actively does not have really anything to engage with.
I mean, yeah, but the sea had even less, arguably. I mean, there were a handful of procedural things that could happen, but there were like, a set number of locations, and then between them all was basically nothing. You don't do anything, you just pick a direction, and you sail for a minute, and you wait. In fact, now I think about it, that might be why. Like, I think it was the fact that you just wait, and you passively experience this whole thing, but in Skyward Sword you have to constantly be managing the bird, and your angle, and the wind, and your gliding. And it makes you actively engage with the nothing. And I think that's why it didn't feel so good, even though there was technically more to do. These are my musings.
I mean, it's fair. That sounds about right. it is definite. They said the sky definitely does feel worse than the Great Sea did, even if they are fundamentally about the same.
I mean, they serve the same purpose for breaking up the world, but yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's something that this game doesn't really have an analog for at all. But, then again, I guess not every Zelda really had that kind of overworld. I mean, Hyrule Field is Hyrule Field, but it's, like, not really any different from any other locations. Whereas the sea and the sky were like, yeah, this is the overworld.
While we're on the topic of it, I actually, now that I think about it, I think this game it actually does feel a lot more like Skyward Sword than, I mean, this area in particular definitely does, but, in general, I think it does that now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, it does do that whole, there is no real overworld, per se. There is just small puzzle areas and big puzzle areas.
Yeah. It's like in a real awkward point on the scale between open world game and not open world game that happens to just be kind of big. It used to be that open world basically meant that you were a JRPG where you had a couple of disconnected areas and you had the world map also high. And there were things in other games that eventually became analogs for the world map. And then you had your games like Final Fantasy XII that didn't have that thing, but they had all these big interconnected areas. And all of the awkward points in between.
Yeah, I kind of associate that with the Tales of Xillia and that kind of era of Tales design. Where you have the towns and everything, and then you have the roads that go between them, which aren't quite open. It's not an open world, but there are these roads and stuff happens on the roads, but not in the same way that things happen in dungeons.
I guess it's a style of world design that I particularly associate with the PS2, because that was when they started doing all of these large-ish areas, but also was about the time where it stopped making sense to do the world map thing, because the world map thing was ultimately a technological shortcut. It made sense on the PS1, but not on the PS2. So, I guess this game was, in every possible way, completely a product of its time. Because technically it predates Skyward Sword. Video games.